monks back out of town. After this violence, Hypatia got swept up into the political controversy. There are two different accounts as to why. The first involves Orestes, who was a fan of the philosopher. He met with her regularly, and they enjoyed their discussions. In fact, you remember that Hypatia was paid by the city of Alexandria to teach in the museum, and that came from Orestes' budget. Now the rumor spread among the fervent Christians that it was Hypatia who kept Orestes from reconciling with Bishop Cyril. Another source, however, says that when Cyril was passing Hypatia's house, he saw many people gathered in front. When he asked what was going on, he was told it was the house of Hipatia the philosopher, and that she was going to emerge to speak to them. Cyril was struck with envy at her popularity, and he began to plot her murder. Either way, we can see the stage was set for disaster. For Christians, Hypatia represented an old order, when civic governors were in charge and ideas were freely discussed. This seemed to detract from what they perceived was a new order in which bishops would guide the cities and their faithful. In 415, during Lent, their rage exploded. They built up their anger when they saw her returning home in her carriage. They surrounded her and dragged her out. They took her to a church called the Caesareum, where they stripped her naked and murdered her. The text says they tore her flesh off with ostrakos, which literally means oyster shells, but it can also be translated as tiles, and it usually is translated that way in modern accounts. It's hard to picture what went on here, but presumably she was mobbed and torn apart with sharp objects within the church. After they tore her to pieces, they took the remains of her body and burnt them.
Come on.
Socrates tells us that most people, including the emperor, blamed Bishop Cyril for this horrible deed. Even if he had not ordered the murder himself, the violence that he fomented certainly erupted in the streets of Alexandria to horrible results. But Cyril did not experience any repercussions from this murder. He served as an influential bishop for the next 30 years. Socrates Scholasticus, Hypatia's contemporary and a staunch Christian, summed up the horror in this way. And surely nothing can be farther from the spirit of Christianity than the allowance of massacres, fights, and transactions of that sort. We can certainly agree with that assessment. Hypatia's career, influence, and horrible death have been long remembered, and each generation that retells her story, of course, has given it a different spin. 200 years after her death, John, the bishop of Nicaea, or Nitria, in the Egyptian desert, made Hypatia a serious threat to Christianity. He said she was devoted at all times to magic, astrolabes, and instruments of music, and she beguiled many people through her satanic wiles. He even accused her of beguiling Orestes through her magic. So her destruction was a victory of Christ over Satan, and he praised Cyril's role in this. He concluded by saying that Hypatia's death ended the last remains of idolatry in the city.
Whatever.
As you can see, his description departed from more contemporary accounts and can really be quite dismissed. This wasn't a struggle between Christ and Satan. As time went by, Hypatia continued to be a symbol for those advocating freedom of intellectual activity. In the 18th century, when many were attacking the influence of the Catholic Church, a scholar, John Tolan, circulated an essay using her as an example of the worst form of bigotry. In modern times, her reputation as a scientist and philosopher has endured more than her horrible death. In 1986, Indiana University Press began publishing a scholarly journal named for her, Hipatia, a journal of feminist philosophy. In the skies, an asteroid is named after her, as is a lunar crater. These are only a few of the many ways Hypatia is remembered in modern times. And what of the old library of Alexandria that was such a center of learning? In 2002, Egypt opened a new library in that city, intended to recreate the impressive original library. The Egyptians hope this structure will rekindle some of the intellectual vigor that made such an impact in the ancient world. Perhaps this library, too, will produce women who can look beyond the constraints of this time to see into the timeless skies or the deepest mysteries. This is the model that Hypatia has left for the world.